You will not find one single person in jail for a violent crime who had a great childhood.
Are you serious? I mean, there are studies that show this?
Yes.
He did not want to talk about his family. He made it clear that he wanted to stand on his own 2 feet, that he wanted to be a big deal in the movie business. And yeah, I'd go as far as to say maybe even a little bit of a chip on his shoulder.
He was fiery. You don't seem very fiery to me. You seem like you might just...
I get crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
No. Some big blow-ups there.
No, we both can get pretty...
You don't roll easily either.
No, we can both get pretty hot, and there were times when we did get hot.
It's tough. So you take a kid who's a teenager going through a tough time no matter what. His brain is going through all kinds of changes, and he's trying to establish himself and his identity, and then you mix in the drugs with it, and it makes for a really bad cocktail.
Yeah, I had no identity, and I had no passions, and I think the reason I had no identity was because, you know, I have a famous dad and a famous grandpa, and they sort of, that fame sort of informs who you are. So I wanted to etch out my own identity with a more rebellious, angry, drug-addicted sort of persona.
Yeah, it's about 5-6 years ago. I was in LA and we had coffee together. He had a project that he was trying to get up and running. He'd struggled. He'd really struggled trying to find his footing in Hollywood. He co-wrote that movie that his dad produced, but nothing really since then. And
love him. I don't love him. No.
You've had plenty of choices, Charlie.
Yeah, rehab or jail. You know, quite a wide selection there.
One of us had to keep him safe.
For him or for you?
I can't stay here anymore, okay? This place is like a prison.
It's not even close.
And so it wasn't a very pleasant meeting. I remember walking away from it thinking the only thing that makes Nick interesting is the one thing he's trying to get away from, which was his family. It was a tricky meeting. He turned up late. I remember he didn't smell really very good at all. In fact, he smelled terrible. He looked really disheveled. He looked like he had just woken up, and he was annoyed. He got angry with the staff when they got his order wrong.
I got nightmares in my head. I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head. I fear.
On the surface, the psychology of the Reiner murders is unfathomable, and typically in true crime, we tend to explain the unfathomable by making the perpetrator into a monster or mad, or that his actions were those of someone deranged by pills or chemicals, or is a psychopath. I maintain that this is a mistake. Nick Reiner isn't taking pills because he doesn't feel anything, or because he's a psychopath, or because he's this empty vessel. Quite the opposite. Addicts aren't addicts because they don't feel any pain, but because they are overwhelmed by the pain they do feel. Their world seems to be a world of hurt, pain, and efforts to avoid and escape facing it, which naturally makes that pain so much worse and robs them of the little agency they had before they started taking drugs. In this analysis, I want to drill down into the psychological mystery of this case, which we can boil down to a single question. Why did Nick Reiner hate his father? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. So first, let's be clear. Many people have said this. In fact, that Nick Reiner hated his father. In fact, within just a day or two of the murders, we saw headlines like this espousing precisely this fact. Nick Reiner really resented Dad Rob, hated himself for not being as talented, prolific, or beloved as his dad or granddad. And then this, I'm not going to quote that headline, but Nick has said that he didn't bond with his dad when he was young. Now, the Washington Post recently did an expose that confirmed and reinforced some of these sentiments and seemed to show Nick's hatred for his parents isn't recent. It was sort of there all along. It's even depicted and acknowledged in Being Charlie, a movie father and son worked on together. The incident where Nick tossed a turkey leg at his father's plate on Thanksgiving in front of 20 guests is one example of many. The interesting thing is that Nick didn't resent his parents, apparently, for sending him to rehab either. So what the hell was the problem? Nick wasn't abused or neglected, and Rob was a loving father.
Therapeutic in some way, but the fact that we were dealing with, things that Nick had gone through and how I had related to it and how his mother had related to it, it forced me to have to see more clearly and understand more deeply what Nick had gone through.
I think it's very clear that Rob and Michelle were loving parents. So what was the problem? Well, the answer lies in a single word: enmeshment. But the enmeshment we are dealing with here is subtle and I would say common but atypical, which is what makes it so hard to see at the end of the day. Let me explain, and let's start by defining enmeshment. Enmeshment is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic, often within families. So there's also enmeshment beyond families. It's characterized by blurred emotional boundaries, excessive dependency, and a loss of individual autonomy. And then they talk about key aspects of enmeshment, and there you have it: lack of boundaries, and then they talk about loss of self. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, superficially, I mean, at first glance, none of these psychologies of enmeshment really work here. None of them are really applicable to the Reiner case. But let's look specifically at key reasons for father-son conflict. There is authoritarianism and control. Is that what we're dealing with here? I don't think so. If anything, we know that Nick Reiner's parents were the opposite of strict, that they didn't set boundaries. Then emotional distancing and neglect, lack of affection, lack of interest, not really applicable. High expectations and criticism, that might be somewhat relevant, but I don't really think it's that relevant. Generational gaps and disagreements, modeling negative behavior, that has to do with fathers who are quick-tempered, inconsistent with rules. I don't think we're dealing with that either. One-sided narratives. And then this is the key one: the need for individuation. Adolescents and young men may struggle against their fathers as a way to define themselves and establish their own independent manhood. And what I think is interesting is it's not as though Rob was stopping his son or undermining his son or frustrating his son. If anything, that Project Being Charlie was trying to assist Nick in getting him where he needed to go. And I think more the issue was Rob Reiner's legacy and Rob Reiner's reputation was this huge edifice that sort of overshadowed Nick, and Nick couldn't sort of get away from that. And I think a lot of that was in his own mind. And of course, if you're going to take drugs, that's not going to be the best way to define yourself or even establish an identity. And have a look at this headline from Rolling Stone: Nick Reiner and the weight of a famous name. In the Dopey podcast, David Mannheim reflects on his friend's struggle with the burden of legacy, right? His father's legacy. Sometimes in order to see what something is, we need to look away at something else. Sometimes the light of truth is just too harsh. It stings, burns, or it blinds us. So let's look away for a moment, away from the Reiner case, and consider an analogy from something fictional. Fiction is harmless, but often a meaningful way of addressing difficult or troubling questions, thoughts, or ideas kind of in a safe space. So this is the example. There's a scene in Season 3, Episode 1 of Stranger Things where Hopper tries to deal with Mike developing intimacy with Al. And despite sharing with his friend Joyce how the intimacy between the teenagers is driving him crazy,
If you order them around like a cop, then they're gonna rebel. It's just what they do.
Well, so what? I'm just supposed to let them do whatever they want.
you can actually understand how the parenting side of this conundrum presents quite a few issues and difficulties. But also the other side does as well. If you want to become who you are, is it going to upset somebody?
Well, I mean, they're just kissing, right?
Yeah, but it is constant. It is constant.
And that's from about 20 minutes into episode 1. You can see Hopper is struggling to overcome an instinct to dominate the situation, to control the situation, and to dominate Mike in particular. Things come to a head when the two teens are making out again, and Hopper has been doing all he can to rehearse sentiments that he enjoys have committed to paper. And then finally, Hopper tries to confront the pair the right way, but he feels humiliated, disrespected, and powerless in the process, and he kind of is. And so in the end, he aggressively orders Mike into his vehicle, locks the door, throws away Joyce's script, and reads Mike the riot act. Predictably, Mike screams at Hopper, "I hate you, I hate you."
What I wanted to say to you is that,
Uh-oh. I think we're in trouble.
I mean, the look on Hopper's face here really is priceless.
Oh, you lying piece of shit!
Well, I'm not actually sure if Mike does scream at Hopper, "I hate you, but you can tell that he has very strong negative feelings, right? And so what is going on here is the rise of Mike, who's kind of a little boy, as an individual, is becoming a person. And at the same time, the fall of Hopper as a father figure as his daughter seeks love, attention, and agency elsewhere. Hopper is kind of becoming irrelevant within this dynamic. And so there's a natural impulse among all three individuals here to regain their power or to claim their power. Hopper from Mike, Mike from Hopper, and Al with Mike. And so how does this power struggle resolve itself? Well, sometimes it doesn't. But Stranger Things, you'll have to watch it, does present a scenario where Mike finally proves himself and Hopper kind of accepts the limits to his own power over Mike. That doesn't tend to happen quite so easily or certainly quickly in the real world. Sometimes that dynamic is set for life in a way. Now, I have to say, normally I have an intuitive understanding in a lot of the criminal cases I cover, and although the drug narrative has always made sense to me in this case, the psychology in this case didn't really. It's easy to lay that at the door of the drug narrative, but when you do that, that only pretends that there is no psychology to deal with in this case. And as vacuous as drug addicts are, there is an underlying psychology. There always is.
How often do you find yourself having the same sort of comic tenor as your father?
Well, I try to be funny whenever I can, but I don't really know. I don't know what that meant.
Well, when you
So in this area, I felt that I had a sort of a brain fart in this case. Nothing resonated, nothing psychology-wise really made sense. Calling nicknames, saying he was selfish and a spoiled brat, all made sense in a certain shallow sense, but it didn't address the heart of the problem. Even this idea of Nick being jealous or envious of his father didn't quite strike at the heart of the issue. I mean, at the end of the day, what is going to incite murderous, homicidal rage in a person? And I think some things were annoying, like people schmoozing up to Nick just to get an audience with his dad. You know, according to Rolling Stone, he realized that so many of his interactions were transactional, people wanting to get close to his dad. But rather than using that and kind of transcending that, and perhaps using that as a starting point, Nick felt insecure and threatened by that. And I think he had reason to be, because he was, for all intents and purposes, a nobody. He wasn't really putting in any real effort into being someone. And in that sense, he was actually trying to trade on the family name. But there is something primal about murder. People always think about it literally, but there's a real symbolic thing going on. You can be threatened symbolically. Your sense of self isn't a real thing. It's a construct. And so if your sense of self is being threatened, it's a symbolic threatening. And so when it comes to people who are living their entire lives in their heads, it is so much easier to threaten the sense of self, because that's all that they've got. And so murder is sometimes often a kind of self-defense. Not literally, of course, but in the sense that the symbolic self feels, or perhaps is, in a certain sense, actually under threat. Murder seems like a symbolic solution to that, except, of course, in reality, in the cold light of day, murder isn't a solution at all. But what exactly is the problem, and how is the problem such an intractable, traumatic, terrible problem that the only way out for Nick seemed to be to commit murder? I mean, how does this manifest in a troubled mind that is contemplating it? What is the trouble? What is the root of this thing? And I have to say, the penny dropped for me a few days ago when I was covering the John Benet Ramsey case, and I came across a female employee of John Ramsey's company, Jane Stobie, and she described Patsy's relationship with her mother as enmeshed. And of course, that's what John Benet's relationship was like with her mother as well.
And I also noticed that there was a lot of enmeshment between the daughters and Nedra. I believe that Nedra called a lot of the shots. And I also,
little old lady for the grandma?
Well, I think that we all have a public persona, and then there's another persona people have. And my experience was that there was another side to these folks.
And when you have enmeshment, this can cause problems with the son and his relationships with other members of the family and even other people. And in this case with Nick Reiner, what was his relationship like with his mother and his sister? And of course, this can be aggravated if the father is busy as well. In any event, enmeshment in several true crime cases explains a lot. There's a lot of enmeshment with Brian Koberger with his mother and the difficulty he had individuating at college, particularly with the opposite sex. And I suspect there was something similar in terms of Amanda Knox's relationship with her mother. There's actually video of Knox and her mother meeting after the murder of Meredith Kircher, and they seem more like two schoolgirls having a reunion, as if they're on the same level, chattering and laughing, than mother and daughter dealing with a dead serious situation. This enmeshment may also be the reason why Knox and Kircher got along so badly, because one was so far along the road to individuation when they lived together, while the other was not. Does that make sense, even just in a broad theoretical framework? Now, in the next analysis, I'm going to talk about the solution to enmeshment. If enmeshment is the problem, what is the solution? Does anyone know what that is? Well, here's a hint, and it comes from Elizabeth Smart's YouTube channel.
Life. And part of me just kind of feels like living, like experiencing life is the best medicine or the best healing. Like, I think if you sit in a room and dwell on the past, dwell on like the terrible things of life, I think it gets harder to live that way.
And isn't that exactly what Nick Reiner was doing? He was just cooped up in this guest house, and he wasn't really living. And then I think he started in his mind blaming his parents for his lot in life. And really, it wasn't them who was to blame. You know, he needed to just go out and experience life, right? In any event, this has been quite a deep analysis. I'm not going to take it further than that. But if you do want to hear about the solution to enmeshment, let me know in the comments. If you appreciated this video, you're more than welcome to hit the thanks button. Otherwise, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.